Haddara walked from court with a co-accused after he was arrested at Melbourne Airport earlier this week. Isabel Quinlan with more.
From the boxing ring to the blood-soaked streets of Melbourne, this is the story of how Fadi Haddara turned from a K1 kickboxer into the mastermind of one of Australia's most dangerous crime empires. We're talking about $1 billion black market where a pack of smokes costs $38 legally but just $11 illegally, fueling over 200 firebombings, 125 arson attacks, and billions lost in government revenue. Families torn apart, alliances shattered, and a city living in fear. And trust me, what you're about to hear is more shocking than any movie script. Right finger if you want the full, unfiltered truth about the underworld. Hit that subscribe button now, because this story is only just beginning. From the ring to the streets, Fadi Haddara didn't grow up destined for crime. In fact, his early life looked completely different. Raised in Melbourne's Lebanese-Australian community, around Altona North and Williamstown, Fadi had real ambitions. He was obsessed with kickboxing, training hard enough to step into the ring at the K1 Grand Prix 2000 Oceania, where he squared off against fighters like Ronnie Sefo. For a while, it looked like he was headed for a legitimate career. But somewhere between trading blows in the ring and clashing on the streets, Fadi realized that the real money wasn't in trophies, it was in crime. This wasn't an overnight switch. The Haddaras were already a respected Lebanese-Australian family, well-connected in Melbourne's western suburbs. But when family loyalty, street politics, and the lure of millions all collided, the path shifted. Fadi evolved from an athlete into what police would eventually call the mastermind behind one of Melbourne's most powerful crime syndicates. The wedding car that started a war. Sometimes, the spark that ignites a full-blown war comes from the smallest thing. In 2009, it was supposed to be a wedding celebration. Instead, a dispute over a wedding car spiraled into bloodshed. That argument between the Haddaras and another well-known Lebanese-Australian crew, the Chuke family, exploded into violence. Soon after, tragedy struck. Mohammed Haddara, Fadi's brother, was shot dead outside the family's Altona North home. The murder tore apart any alliance that had existed between the two families. What had once been a partnership in Melbourne's underworld turned into outright war. Ali Chuke was eventually sentenced to 24 years in prison, with 18 before parole. But Mohammed's death was just the beginning. It locked both families into a feud that would shape the Haddara's rise, and their empire, for years to come. Building the empire. The Haddaras didn't find their fortune in drugs or armed robberies, the real goldmine was cigarettes. By the late 2010s, Australia had unintentionally created the perfect setup for an illegal tobacco boom. Taxes kept going up, prices skyrocketed, and suddenly smoking became a luxury. By 2025, a legal pack of Marlboro Gold cost around $38. On the street, the exact same pack was going for $11. And here's where the numbers turn jaw-dropping. A single container of smuggled cigarettes could pull in up to $10 million in profit. That's more than cocaine, except with a fraction of the legal risk. The margins were so wild that even if a syndicate lost 30 containers to customs, they'd still be rolling in profit. The Haddaras saw the opening and jumped in headfirst. Using their roots in Melbourne's western suburbs, they built a system, importers to bring the goods in, muscle to enforce order, and retailers willing to sell under the counter. By 2022-23, the black market trade had grown so huge that the government was losing an estimated $2.7 billion in tax revenue every year. The Haddaras weren't just part of the game, they were climbing to the top of it. The tobacco wars begin. But money on that scale never comes without blood. One of Fadi Haddara's biggest rivals was Kaz Hamad, a former Melbourne drug lord with Iraqi roots. His reputation? He preferred firebombs over conversations. Even after Kaz was deported in 2023, he didn't lose control. Through his loyalists on the ground, his network still had reach, and intelligence reports showed that he saw Fadi as a direct threat to his empire. What followed looked less like business competition and more like open warfare. In October 2023, a Class Smash Repairs, a panel shop once tied to Fadi's own arrest history, went up in flames in a suspicious pre-dawn arson attack. Records linked the shop to Nazim Haddara, a relative, but the hit sent a clear message. Fadi was still in play. Then things got even more personal. In November 2023, Fadi's Docklands restaurant, Charisma, was firebombed not once, but twice in just 3 days. Security cameras captured masked men smashing windows, dousing the place in accelerant, and setting the building ablaze. This wasn't random vandalism, this was a declaration of war. The scale of violence. By 2023, Melbourne looked less like a city and more like a battleground. The so-called tobacco wars unleashed chaos, over 200 firebombings and 125 arson attacks since March alone. Police tried fighting back, making more than 100 arrests, but the firestorms kept coming. Things got so out of control that Parliament pushed through emergency legislation just to deal with the crisis. What made it even scarier was the method behind the madness. This wasn't random street crime, it was structured. If a shopkeeper dared to refuse selling black market smokes, word spread fast. Through encrypted apps, contracts were allegedly handed out to teenage street crews or bikie gangs. They'd roll up, threaten the owners, and if the warning didn't work, the shop was lit up. And the money driving it all? Astronomical. With tobacco taxes swallowing 65% of the retail price, almost a third of all cigarettes smoked, 28.6%, came from the black market. For smokers, the math made the choice clear. A pack-a-day habit cost nearly $15,000 a year legally, but just under $3,000 illegally. With stakes like that, the cycle of violence practically fed itself. The empire's evolution. Here's where the Haddara story takes a twist. After years of raids, arrests, and endless firebombings, most families would have crumbled. But the Haddaras didn't just survive, they adapted. By mid-2025, intelligence reports claimed they'd done the unthinkable, formed an alliance with Qasem Hamad's syndicate, their sworn enemy. This wasn't a truce born from peace, it was business. Both groups suddenly faced a new challenger, the Barakat brothers. These weren't traditional mobsters. They'd started as fruit and vegetable wholesalers, but by the 2010s they were climbing fast in the tobacco trade. With old criminal ties and fresh partnerships, they became powerful enough to threaten both Haddara and Hamad operations. The breaking point came in January 2025, when their ally, the feared gangster Sam, the Punisher, Abdul Rahim, was gunned down. His death left a power vacuum big enough to redraw Melbourne's underworld. For the Haddaras, teaming up with Hamad wasn't about forgiveness, it was about survival, and making sure they still controlled their piece of a multi-billion-dollar empire. The government's response. The scale of the tobacco empire didn't go unnoticed. By 2024, law enforcement was hitting back with some of their biggest operations yet. That year alone, Australian Border Force seized 1.8 billion cigarettes. But even they admitted the truth, out of the 3.2 million shipping containers coming through Melbourne's ports each year, they could only physically check about 1%. That tiny margin left plenty of room for smokes to slip through. Meanwhile, the Australian Federal Police launched wave after wave of operations, arresting alleged ringleaders tied to multi-million-dollar importing networks. And to keep the pressure on, the government pledged $188.5 million over 4 years, while also rolling out specialized strike teams like Victoria Police's Task Force Lunar, designed specifically to crush the illicit tobacco trade. But not everyone's convinced it will work. Critics point to the obvious. When taxes are sky-high, crime thrives. Just like America's Prohibition era gave birth to bootlegging empires, Australia's tobacco taxes have turned cigarettes into a billion-dollar black market. And as long as those numbers stay the same, so will the incentive for families like the Haddaras to keep building their empire. The current landscape. Today, Fadi Haddara is still on the radar of law enforcement. But here's the twist. He hasn't been hit with fresh charges since February 2025, when firearms charges against him were suddenly dropped. In fact, police were forced to pay $20,000 in court costs after pulling the case, a sign the evidence wasn't nearly as strong as they first claimed. Still, nobody's fooled into thinking the fight is over. The tobacco wars continue to rage, and while the Haddara name doesn't carry the same untouchable authority it once did, it hasn't faded either. The family has simply adapted, folding themselves into larger, evolving networks that reflect how Melbourne's underworld now operates. The billion-dollar question. At the heart of the Haddara story is a brutal truth about organized crime. If governments create scarcity, criminals will find a way to profit. The Haddaras didn't reinvent the wheel. They built a tobacco empire by exploiting a gap, where a packet of cigarettes was suddenly worth more than a line of cocaine. And that gap is only widening. With tobacco excise set to climb another 10% in the next 2 years, and with illicit smokes already eating up a growing chunk of the market, the conditions that fed the Haddara empire are still alive and well. The faces may change, the alliances may shuffle, but the numbers remain the same: huge profits, low risks, and a never-ending demand from smokers priced out of the legal market. The Haddara saga isn't just about one family's rise from a boxing ring to a billion-dollar black market. It's about how government policy unintentionally created the perfect playground for organized crime. And as long as that equation doesn't change, there will always be another Fadi Haddara, ready to swap the gloves for something far more dangerous.